Hello, welcome to episode 26. Let me repeat that, 26 of the Family Pictures Podcast. We are moving, we are grooving, yeah! And we have yet another film to talk about within the Cameron Crowe, John Hughes Smackdown. And this is the final one we're doing. Actually, I'm a little sad because this has actually been a really fun tete-a-tete between the two writers and their vision of the teenage culture of the 80s. But we're going to kind of end with the crown jewel of teenage films from the 80s, the 1985 Breakfast Club, right? I got you, Bender. 2 months. 2 months, Bender. So we have you for
Don't mess with the ball.
You'll get the horns. And I was watching that with my son, and he's like, Dad, you always say that. I'm like, that's right. I am burning, as well as I should be. So anyway, we will be talking about a little bit about Crowe versus Hughes as a kind of summary at the end of this. So don't let us forget that, Michael.
No.
But let's
by the way, this is another. There is someone else here in the podcast, right? It's me, Michael Branson Smith, right?
Oh. You are forgettable, Michael, right?
I know. Sorry, folks. I'm an Ali Sheedy in the background, just like going around the corner, away from everybody else. But I am lurking. I am observing. I am watching all of you actions, Jim Groom. All those spaces on the internet you occupy. I know where you are.
All right, let me try this again. Hey, welcome to Family Pictures Podcast, episode 26. I'm Jim Groom here with my co-host,
Michael Branson Smith.
Oh, and what a beautiful co-host he is. And we're here to talk about The Breakfast Club today, which is 1985 John Hughes, probably the most famous teenage 80s movie of all times. I think so, at least in the U.S. Michael, am I fair to say that?
Certainly from our generation. I mean, this film was not one that the boomer kind of producers at the time wanted to release because it didn't have any partying, beer drinking, naked ladies, action across, spaces and cars and reckless behavior. It was a talkie, and we're going to talk about whether its realism matters or not because it is basically a film about the inner monologue of teenagers. Like it's an effort to get into the mind of a teenager, not just observe them, but understand their thinking and whether that thinking has evolved as it obviously has amongst teenagers. But there are things that, you put in the notes, like there are truisms and they are there. And I think that's what makes it sustain. And I think that's probably, you said that your son connected more to this versus Fast Times at Ridgemont High, right?
Yeah, he definitely did. We watched them back to back, and he had a really good theory. His theory was why he really liked Fast Times. He enjoyed it. He said it was a little bit more broad. And in its broad, there was a lot of breadth, but very little depth, where he really liked that this was a 9-hour dig into these kids' lives and the way in which that developed their character. He was really like that for him. He came away really liking Brian and everything. But we're getting ahead of the game, and that's good. Let's go back. This is John Hughes' sophomore effort, right? But there is no sophomore slump to be found in this one. This is a film made for all of $1 million.
Which is crazy.
Insane. And it grosses 50+ million. It basically
barely advertised, barely released because they didn't think it was going to work.
Yep. And it's another kind of bombshell. I don't mean bomb. I mean like it blew up. It became kind of an anthem for many an 80s kids, including myself. And so we have a kind of film that was made at I don't say derelict high school, but an abandoned high school. They spent 3 to 4 months shooting it. But I really love the idea, and I can understand why it only cost $1 million because it was literally one location.
That's the horror movie model of today.
Right?
Simple. Panic room. It's like you write a script around a single location and you just maximize it.
Yeah. And he did that brilliantly. And You mentioned it already, so I'm going to actually kind of jump the gun here and say one of the things I did like about the movie right away was that the setting was immediately relatable. While it was only really one setting, a high school of the 80s, it was a setting that with the lockers, with the gym, with the library, with the heavy doors that close behind them, with the fire exits, like it was, simple enough, but immediately relatable. It might as well have been a high school on Long Island where I went. And I think that's one of the elements that worked in terms of, and you talk about it a lot, like filming in place, right? Filming in a real place to give you that sense of a real space. Now, you suggest that realism doesn't really matter in this, though.
It doesn't in the same way. Well, it is a constructed space. Like the cool thing is like, this is the fantasy of a library. In the production notes that we discovered, any high school they went to, unsurprisingly, the library was too small because the library is an afterthought in most high schools, honestly. And so they built this kind of cathedral of a high school library that had multi-stories that allowed for all these shooting opportunities, which was very smart. And so it was built in the gymnasium of this retired high school, which was of the brutalist architecture era of the 30s and 40s, and they built this concrete block in the middle of nowhere. And sure enough, there just weren't enough kids to go to this high school, so they had to find some other use to it. And they'd said they literally rented it for like $25,000 a month. It was like pathetically cheap. So they were keeping it, and I think even they used it for Ferris Bueller's Day Off, and he was shooting using the same crew to shoot some of. This is when I know I'm just rattling off too much at once here, but
it's all right. It's our podcast.
Yeah. This is when John Hughes was his maximalist moment. Like he was making the most of his writing and his whatever they would give him, because he was so new. It's like that brand new. And when you're this young artist, you have all this insane amount of energy and productivity. And yeah, he was brand new. I mean, and they said he shot something like, just like hours and hours and hours of footage in 36 days, which is a feat unto itself, because it was just so dialogue heavy, and he would let them riff. And there's a lot we should talk about how John Hughes approached his relationship to his actors at some point, and giving them this opportunity to, discover their characters, both in the rehearsals before they started shooting and actually during the filming itself as well.
And I read somewhere that they filmed it. They did rehearsals for weeks, but then they filmed all the scenes chronologically.
Yeah,
which is crazy.
Yeah, and it was possible, obviously, in large part because it was a single location too.
Yeah,
and they also, what was cool is Judd Nelson tells a story about. There's a wonderful oral history from 1999. This man named, I think it was Sam Smith, got interviewed basically every actor and many of the production people as well, on top of Hughes. And he even plopped them into his original high school, as part of the rehearsal for a couple days, until they recognized Emilio Estevez, because he had been in the Outsiders, right? So he had a presence. And Judd Nelson was the one who discovered the two alleys, the burnouts, and he went to the burnouts crowd and tried to gamble with them and buy beer for them. It's fucking crazy stuff like that,
Well, it's interesting too to think about who could have been in this movie. So for the Judd Nelson part, Bender, they were originally considering Emilio Estevez. I think coming off of Repo Man, he had that idea. He was a punk and kind of a hardcore kid, but they couldn't find anyone for Andrew, so Hughes moved him into the jock role. And then they were looking at John Cusack for this role. And for a minute, I guess, Nicolas Cage, too, which would have been super interesting to think about Nicolas Cage as Bender. I don't know how that would have played out, but it would have been funny. And then all sorts of people like Robin Wright, Meg Tilly, and some others interviewed for the role of Allison, which is interesting. Or Claire, I'm sorry.
Claire, okay.
That's right. So there was all sorts of, again, this is so many of the talents that we'll come to know got their start through these films, whether it's Cameron Crowe and Amy Heckerling's, or John Hughes' films, right? We saw that
Yeah.
already with 16 Candles, and we see it again here. So that's super interesting. I love the fact to hear all these names, like John Cusack as Bender.
Yeah, he was
so
apparently,
weird.
I read something where he said he was pretty pissed off that he didn't get picked, but they just didn't think of him as intimidating enough. And they talk about Judd Nelson, who went full, character actor mode, not
Like
character
Spicoli,
actor.
right?
Yeah,
Method acting.
Method actor, thank you. And, he came into the final audition with all because he was his character was the last cast. Obviously, Molly Ringwald and Anthony Michael Hall were cast basically on the set of 16 Candles without auditions. And Ali Sheedy, I can't remember how she exactly won the role, but she was in. And so there's this, in the oral history I already described, there's this description of how Judd Nelson showed up for his last audition. And there's like 20 people in the room, including the entire cast. And this is one, it's like, Sheedy's saying, the first time I saw Judd, I completely fell in love with everything about him. He was outside the window at the studio with a tennis ball, and he was slamming against the wall. And I was just like, oh my God, this is the Great Escape. And what's his name? The famous actor with being incarcerated in solitary with the ball in the German concentration camp. Oh, I'll have to look that one up.
Anyway, Steve McQueen?
Steve McQueen. Thank you. It was Steve. He was like Steve McQueen, and she's like, he looked like a wild animal. And he turned to John Hughes and says, "Who is that?" So you get a sense that even then, like, this is as two, venerate Bryans in this podcast. He's the bad boy, and there's a lot about the Bender character that, in watching it as adult, like, he's ruthless and absolutely awful to Claire, and in the final confession moment when he tears her apart one last time, I'm just like, it was brutal, like brutal. And this is him throughout the entire filming, apparently.
Yeah, like, so supposedly, right? Like, he was so brutal to Molly Ringwald both when they were filming and then when they weren't filming on the set.
Yeah.
That he almost got fired. Like, Hughes almost came in and was trying to be like, enough of this guy. He's unbearable. Right. And so, he stayed on. I don't know how, but...
Well, it was Sheedy. It's credit to Ali Sheedy and Molly Ringwald. They wanted him to stay. They convinced John Hughes to keep him because he was, unsurprisingly, trying to be protective because he was... I mean, the way he comes across as an adult, looking at teenagers, it's so funny, like the readings of this, like, as teenagers, we're so much more readily accepting of abuse. We think that's kind of our lot in life, is to be abused to a certain extent, right? And when there's adults in the room, they're like, hey, what are you doing here? Like, not on my watch kind of stuff, and so, I'm way more on John Hughes's side, but they're literally, Anthony Michael Hall and Molly Ringwald are literally still teenagers, and everybody else is like 20, 21. And I'm just like amazed that this was allowed in a sense, and they wanted it. And that's kind of speaks to this idea of being a teenager in their inner thinking rather than simply what's happening too.
Now, another interesting casting moment, and we're kind of going through the cast a little bit without formally going through it, is Carl the janitor. How did Carl the janitor get his role? And B, who was also cast for Carl the janitor, which I love. Yeah.
So I'll take the first part, which is that. So Carl the janitor as a character didn't exist originally. There was actually instead a female PE teacher that was like hosting synchronized swimming classes or something. And it was to give the opportunity, as all teen movies were supposed to give a nude scene, right? They were going to be able to see her dressing because she's like was going to be this voluptuous, beautiful PE teacher. And Ali Sheedy, and Molly Ringwald, and I'm forgetting on the production designer or the costume designer, they rebelled. These three women, they're like, this is terrible. We're not doing that. Finally, like, let's get those horny boomers out of our picture here. And so they did, and that's how he said, okay, let's do the janitor. And so what happens? Like, who does he cast?
So I guess who's the first before, we get the individual who plays Carl, which is John Capellos. We have Rick Moranis from The Wildlife. And he comes in it and he plays it with like a gold tooth and a Russian accent.
Yeah.
And he's kind of like playing it really comedically.
Yeah.
And I think John Hughes was kind of like, wait, that doesn't really work for what I'm trying to do. So then goes to the, I think Second City production and grabs John Capellos, who's great. And who Tommy, after watching it, was like, he's a goat. I love that guy. So, but, it would be interesting. Another what if moment to see Rick Moranis as Carl. Oh,
God, it would have been. It would have definitely ratcheted up the comedy aspect of the film for sure.
Yeah, because the comedy aspect of this film, in some ways, is really kind of muted. Yeah, I was expecting Michael Anthony Hall, right, who Tommy loved, by the way. I was expecting him to be as funny as he was in 16 Candles when I first watched this, and he wasn't. He played it a lot more dramatically, a lot more seriously.
This is where I think we should. I mean, they still try to call this a comedy, and other than like the processed meat that Ali Sheedy flips into the statue, and her reaction to her, pixie stick Captain Crunch sandwich, it's mostly it's a teen drama. It's your first real teen drama that's avoiding the sex, the boomer, the horn, and then this is one of my big revelations of this. It's like
hot take coming.
The sex comedy is not about teenagers. The sex comedy is about horny boomers that wanted to see teenagers having sex.
Exactly.
And this is John Hughes, who we're going to get into his feelings about boomers in his own generation and at some point.
But as a teenager watching these films, I did appreciate some of the sex. I'm just going to be clear here.
No.
The boomers maybe were looking out for kids like me.
Yes, because we didn't have the internet and pornography wasn't everywhere. So yes. Sure, it was that formative time, and this is obviously for boys, unlike girls. Who got to see nothing.
Yeah, exactly. Even when Fast Times at Ridgemont High tried to deliver, they couldn't without an X rating.
Right.
So let's look a little bit at the cast of characters, and then I want to talk about the introduction of this film, because I think the introduction is some of the best 5 minutes of exposition. And maybe we can actually talk about the cast of characters as we talk about the exposition.
Yeah, sure.
So, Michael, how does this film start?
So, I mean, besides the opening montage, which we're going to ignore, but it's the parents. It's through the parents, and we are the Family Pictures podcast. And that's what I kind of, because of the framing of our podcast, it actually creates this interesting new lens for a film that's been talked about literally for decades, and the cast only recently, for the first time ever, got back together for the 40-year anniversary, where Emilio Estevez apparently finally showed up. Anyway, so we meet Claire with her posh dad, and that's, Claire is played by Molly Ringwald, and Claire Standish is like the socialite, right?
Absolutely. And I thought it was so interesting, sorry to interrupt you, the make and model of the car and all of what that said, right?
Oh, for each of them, each and every single one. Yeah. So Claire's dad is in the BMW. That's like, super pristine, and he's incredibly well dressed, and he's incredibly forgiving of her, like having to endure this travesty of going to detention that he couldn't get her out of. He's like so apologetic. I'm so sorry I couldn't get you out of this, basically, like at least she's alluding to that. It was his job to make it so she didn't have to do this. And then, I think,
yeah.
Oh, and she's the first person we learn instantly why she had to go to detention, which is she skipped school for shopping, to go shopping.
She ditched class to go shopping.
Yeah.
Right. And he was like, that's not a big deal. Come on. Yeah. That's not a major offense. That's what the dad said.
Yeah. And then next we have Brian, who's the geek, and his mom shows up with his little sister in a K car, a classic Chrysler K-body car that it's like existed for 2 decades, that car style.
Do you remember what the license plate said?
Yes, it's EMC squared, basically.
There it is. It's awesome. Yeah. Love that detail. And it turns out that the mother and the sister are actually really Michael Anthony Hall's mother and sister.
Yeah.
So I love that. It's his real life mother.
And, it's great because he's introduced through basically he's trying to explain his detention. I'm not supposed to do anything. And his mother's like, you figure out a way to study, young man.
Exactly.
And so we immediately get the pressure that he has from his family about being a good student.
And the sister's like, yeah.
Yeah.
I love it.
Yeah. She has one line probably in the film history and she killed it. At 8 years old. It was
so
really
we have
good.
the BMW, we have the K car. And I love the way the cars do this exposition too. Like the materiality of the 80s talking to us. Next comes what, Michael? And you're killing it, by the way.
The Ford Bronco driven by, Andrew's dad, the jock. Classic car of a good working man, right? Who has expectations of his son to perform on the field of battle. And, he understands that young men screw around, but buddy, you got caught. So you got to pay the price. We don't know exactly what he got caught doing, but somehow he was fucking around and doing good boys, horsing around stuff. But
no
we don't
team's
want
gonna
you to
take
ruin
a discipline case.
Yeah, no, we can't have you ruining your ride. And so we get like the tough macho dad telling us how it's supposed to be with his son.
Absolutely. You're nailing it. The fourth car comes
Allison,
up. What is it?
It is a Cadillac Seville with the short back, right? The short trunk.
Classic 80s car.
It's like the stubby backed Cadillac.
Yeah.
And out of the back pops Allison, who's dressed in black. So this is the only teenager where we're not seeing the parents that arrive to drop off their child. And she tries to peer in to like say goodbye and catch a glimpse of her parents. And you do see two shadows. So both of them are in there. Yeah. And they just literally accelerate off and ignore her.
And it's one of the great stutter steps in film. So she's like uncertain whether she should go and say something to them. And they pause for a second. She goes and then they take off. It's so perfect. It's acting without acting. It's just like a situational moment where you learn everything about their relationship in a matter of seconds from her getting out of a car.
And to finish our establishing framing of our five characters' relationships to their parents, in the same shot as Allie walks out of frame, Bender is walking middle frame towards us, all by himself with his sunglasses and his like saunter of a cool dude who just doesn't have a care in the world. And that's how they're introduced. But same thing happens immediately, effectively, in the library as they all occupy or try to occupy their positions within the dais that they all sit down at in the library.
Yeah, it's true. And they were all kind of shuffling where you have Allison and Andrew up front sitting together because they kind of fit in.
They're you mean Claire and Andrew?
Claire, sorry. Yep. Claire and Andrew sitting up front. You have Bender kicking Brian over to the other side of the desk so he can lay down and have a full-blown car right behind Andrew and Claire, and soon we learn is to annoy the shit out of them.
Exactly. Bender is like he wants to position himself simply so he knows who he wants to target this day. Like he's picking out his prey basically as he walks in.
And so beyond that, you have Allison, who makes a point of walking all the way around that weird-ass statue in the middle of the library and sitting all the way back to the right, well behind Brian. And then they're set up. And in comes my favorite character of the entire film, Dean Vernon, or Assistant Dean Vernon, or Assistant Principal Vernon, whatever his name is.
He's the Dean of Discipline. Remember, we've talked about this. Like, the idea of every high school had a vice principal who was the Dean of Discipline. He was like the scary motherfucker that you didn't want to have to go to his office.
So what does it tell you about me, Michael? That he
this is no.
without
I want to
question,
tell you. Tell me what it tells about you. That this
he
is your,
was
who you
in
identify with.
1985 and still in 2025, so 40 years later, my favorite character in this movie. The best quotes, the best moments, the most relatable for me. He's the one who I wanted to grow up and be like.
Jim, come on.
So anyway, I just love the way in which within literally minutes, John Hughes does a masterclass of cinema, taking what he does in writing and puts it on the screen for us to understand each of these characters even before we get into the talkie, even before we have this extensive diatribe by Bender against everyone in the room, but in particular Claire, right? Like we know that's coming, but we're beautifully set up in the first 5 minutes. And I just really love the way he does that. I think it's just brilliant.
Yeah, and we also have two other points of introduction. We obviously have the letter, like that bookends the film. But even before that, we have this quote from David Bowie that apparently Ali Sheedy had shown John Hughes. And it's this like, in these children that you spit on as they try to change their worlds, you are immune to your consultations. They're quite aware of what they're going through. And this is, John Hughes is like, holy shit, you summed up my movie in a quote from David Bowie. And so he's like, of course I'm going to get permission to use this in the front of the film. And that's the beginning of this dialogue we hear about through the actors and productions that existed between John Hughes and his teenage characters, and wishing to make sure that their voices, even though he, I think, had a clear understanding of a teenage voice, quite, or their inner voice more is even probably a better way of thinking about it, and then trying to bring it outside to craft this dramatic narrative. He was always listening to them, and that's what's so interesting about it.
Well, you brought up an interesting point in the notes that I did not know and I was fascinated by is, I guess Hughes got married when he was 20 to his wife who was 19. Yeah. And he identified more because he was so young and he'd moved into his kind of suburban world or whatever. He identified more with the teenagers of the kids rather than his neighbors, right? So the teenagers,
he was closer in age.
Exactly. That's fascinating to me.
Yeah. And this is part of Hughes. Like, it's so interesting because, just to give a little bit, it's like in this interview with the family of John Hughes, as well as some history. This is kind of an in memoriam kind of article in Vanity Fair. One of his sons, James, was talking about that that one of his major quote unquote hobby horses, it was a constant topic in the household. And this is, mind you, John Hughes is kind of retired from cinema when he died. He's not involved post 2000 for the most part. And he just believed in, apparently he wanted to pass the baton. It's like, my voice, it's been heard. My voice should not be the dominating voice forever just because I need to make art, right? And so he described in his own word, James is his son's words, like the attention hogging egotism of his own generation, the baby boomers. And in his view, boomers did not know when to step aside and cede the stage, as we're still dealing with.
We are still dealing with. We have King Vampire fucking boomer Trump right now dealing with that, really like showing the way on that. But absolutely, like I have my differences with some of Hughes' stuff, but when you threw out that quote, I was like, absolutely brilliant. Yeah. I'm a fan. I love Hughes again. So I really like that. Now, one of the things he's getting at, and you already talked about like the interior life of the teen and how he's kind of thinking through that. So one of the things I started to see as I was watching this and taking some notes and getting ready for this podcast is part of what's really setting up is the pressure these kids are under, right? And they are all, archetypes, right? Or archetypes, however you'd say that. Where you got the brain, you got the kind of princess, you got the basket case, you got the jock, and you got the criminal, right? So there are archetypes, but then they start to come down because of his writing is so good and he's so sharp to be real people, right? Real people who you might know in high school and who have identities. And each of them have real struggles, right? So what are some of the struggles, if we go character by character, we're dealing with as a result of, as this kind of, narrative starts to take off and they start to kind of loosen up and really talk to each other, not just attack each other, as Bender probably spends the first 15 minutes of this film doing. And it's relentless. I actually kind of got bored by it. I was like, all right, enough, right? Like, you really are. And that's why I loved fucking Paul Gleason when he was like, you're just trying to show off for these kids. You're just trying to be a big deal. You're trying to show them what a big deal you are. I agreed. Bender couldn't stop. He was just
no, he can't. But that's, let's start with Bender, because what is his problem, Jim Groom, as the lover of Paul Gleason's Vernon? He's from a pretty fucked up family, right? Like, I think, this is a kid who knows, and this is why I think he targets Claire as literally calls her, you Richies, or, and you have everything, I have nothing, is another famous quote. And he's not completely wrong. The performance he gives to give his familial context, when he's challenged by the Andrew character and says, well, what about your family? And he goes, the whole no good, dirty, you forgot lazy. And then it goes, shut up, bitch, go get me my turkey pot pie. Like, these are the quotes that are so familiar to us. Yeah. But if you really think about like what's role playing here, all right, so John Bender's probably living in a home where it's financially crazy distressed. There's probably a ton of alcohol going on, like a lot of alcoholism, especially on the father's side. There's physical abuse of his mother, which he acts out. And John Bender is just like completely screwed by it. And he knows he's screwed. He knows he's smart at the same time. Like, even though he's relentless, he's incredibly intelligent and witty throughout of it. Like, he is so fast. Like, he's someone that you would want on the legal stand arguing for you because he's so fast thinking, right? But he is unrelentlessly punishing as a result of being abused. And we don't know, like, he does the whole showing the burn mark. This is what you get for spilling paint in the garage. And, it's a burn mark, and we're kind of left to imagine it's like, well, did he do this to himself, or did he hook it on a fence? This is something like even John Hughes talks about. So Bender's world, his problems, which are, frankly, from my perspective, unresolved in this film. And as is Claire Standish's problems, they're also unresolved. It's only 3 out of the 5 characters that actually have an arc in their character. Those 2 are on polar opposite sides, and they're fucked, I think, all the way through.
Now, you get a sense, and that whole idea that somehow they're going to get together is another thing that I think is unrealistic. And that Monday morning is going to be different for these kids. Yeah. I don't believe it. Like, I don't think that there's been some sort of transcendent moment. I think they've had a moment, but I think everything will go back to normal.
I think, well, we'll get to it, but I really think Andrew, and despite the fake makeover of Allison, I think those 2 had a shot because they show how they get each other really quickly, and they actually are emotionally investing in each other before the walls are completely taken down. But speak to Claire's. What's her issues? Where is she at?
Yeah, so Claire is kind of like a pawn in her parents' divorce game, or almost quasi-divorce game. Yeah. And they use her kind of as a weapon. And she even says it immediately, right? She says, always threatening divorce. My father and my mother used me between the 2. And I mean, I kind of sympathize with Claire a little bit, but then I kind of don't. I think she's played really well by Molly Ringwald, but it's hard for me to kind of sympathize with the Richies. You know what I mean? Like, their problems. Like, she pulls out sushi for lunch.
Yeah, that her dad bought for her on the way or the night before, and put it in the fridge. And
I just want to be on a plane to Paris or France. Like, it's some of the stuff like she would say was very like hard to identify. Again, brilliantly played by Molly Ringwald. But her character starts to kind of develop over time. But as Bender is really like laying into her, she doesn't have much to say in response, right? Yeah. And she's just kind of hoping Andrew was a kind of ally, but he's an unreliable ally. Like he is not a reliable ally, and you would think Andrew just kick this fucking guy's ass, and this movie's over.
But
right?
you don't want to get into this, Jim. Why? Well, I'd kill you, and then your parents would sue my ass, and it'd be a big fucking mess. That's why.
But
Andrew's...
that's why I love Paul Gleason's character so much. Paul Gleason actually breaks through the veil of Bender and shows what a pussy he is. And that's why I love Paul Gleason.
Oh, come on. This is a man who wants
That is my take on this movie.
He's a 17-year-old abused kid.
Good.
Paul
Good.
So you think abusers deserve to be abused? And
Absolutely. After
keep
what
the
he does to
cycle
her,
going, Jim Groom?
he made it clear. This is how the world works. You think you got power there.
Dick in the dirt.
I'm going to put your dick in the dirt. Exactly. Listen, Bender, when you're caught up in your own pathetic life, I'll be there. And I'll knock your dick in the dirt. That's the greatest single monologue of the 80s, probably. And I just think Vernon is great because Vernon gives, Bender a little taste of his own medicine. And, I think Vernon, and you see in that moment, just what a weak, pumped up idea that Bender is. And, there's something I really love about puncturing through that kid. Is that the wrong kind of reading for this movie?
He is still a kid, Jim Groom, and this is
He was 21 when this was made.
It doesn't matter. He's playing a teenager, and he's written as a teenager, and Paul Gleason's character, Vernon, is 39.
How long can we coddle them for, Michael?
I know. This is why the boomers are still in charge, right? Because we need to be told we can't be coddled.
I can't help it. I love Paul Gleason's character.
Okay. So let's finish our slate here. I'm going to talk about Allison. You can talk about Andrew, who you seem to have little affection for. But I have a lot of affection for Allison because Allison was a character I definitely knew in high school, or knew the group. I knew this group of, alternative girls, and this is who I dated basically in high school. This was the equivalent of my high school girlfriend, and just wanting to not fit in intentionally, but also, and this is the thing that I took away so much from this is Allison was always watching, right? She positions herself in the back of the room because she's trying to observe everyone. And there's multiple times in which she is carefully paying attention. And my favorite is her literal first word in the film is "ha!" And it's calling out Claire's bullshit of self-pity about her parents using her. And everybody turns around where did that come from? And because she's been listening, she knows what's going on, and she has a very distinct opinion about everyone, and she's caring. When Carl comes in, the janitor, and everybody, especially Brian, who knows Carl for some reason, it's never explained, is trying to ignore him because he doesn't want to be seen as the kid who knows the janitor. And you can see in Allison's face that she adores him instantly because she recognizes immediately he's a real person, unlike all of this role playing that's going on in front of her. And it's her that calls out. She's the first to call out Andrew about his bullshit, right? And because there's very little honesty for the first half of this film. And even as they're, obviously Bender's honesty is all performative, right? He's he literally says it, I'm just being honest. And we know it's performative. He doesn't really care about anybody. And so we learn Allison's concern is no one's concerned about her. And that's ultimately her concern. And the way it's revealed is actually quite funny in the confession scene. But this is it's really a wonderfully drawn character of this creative person who doesn't know how to fit into this much more aggressive world of high school, generally speaking.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I love it when she does come clear about why she's there. And it is a brilliant scene. And she's a great character. I love her, the way Tommy's really into drawing right now, and she's drawing that bridge scene. And then
Yeah.
she shakes her hair to put all the snow on it. And he got a real kick out of that. He loved that. I mean, Andrew, he plays a pretty straight jock. It was hard for me when first seeing this film to see Emilio Estevez, who I so identified with as Otto in Repo Man, come in and play this jock. But that's what you do as an actor. So, nothing there. But like, he plays it pretty straight. Like, he feels the pressure of his parents, or particularly his dad and his coach. Win, win, win at all costs. You're a machine. You have to win. I'm just lucky because I'm fast and I'm strong. And that's where I get my kind of, I value from. And so he
that's his false honesty first, though. That's his like performing out like I'm this racehorse to Allison's character to try to impress her. Versus
and she's like, why are you here? Right.
Right. Exactly. She immediately calls his bullshit, right? Yeah. Calls him on his bullshit. And that's what I think I love about their interactions. And they actually their relationship is set up more honestly. It's like they are trying to connect, and, she's just like interrogating him in the beginning with that walk when they're supposed to be getting sodas for lunch. And he's trying to be honest, but she knows he's not being honest. And he's saying this bullshit about who he is. But then it starts over again when they have all smoked pot, right? Yeah. And then he becomes this character.
The truth serum.
Right, it is. But it also points to Andrew's character. One of the things, in watching this, for the millionth time, but with a different focus for that we're actually going to talk about it and being more detailed about it. Andrew's the emotional facilitator. Multiple times he's the one that like steers the discussion. This is the first one when Allison literally dumps herself on them finally to Brian and to Andrew. And we do need to get to Brian's, like, what's his motivations.
Sure.
She says, my home life is unsatisfying. And Brian's like, what the fuck does that mean? And he's like giving her shit. But Andrew's like, well, everybody's home's life is unsatisfying. If it wasn't, we'd all live with our parents forever. And this is like Andrew's first moment of like being like, I get it. Like you're right. And he does this again and again. And in the confession scene, he says, what's bizarre? We're all pretty bizarre. Some of us is just better at hiding it. And he helps Brian go through his confession at the end. And so weirdly, like the jock seems like one of the more emotionally intelligent ones in this whole picture, which is kind of surprising.
Yeah, no, I think and I noticed that too with the Emilio Estevez character in terms of his connection with Allison, and then his also feeling really bad about why he's in there and what he did, and knowing that he wants to laugh kind of about it, but also knows that what he did is horrible, and he has that kind of come to moment of. I taped this hairy kid's weaklings, butt cheeks together. And all he could think about is the humiliation he caused on him and his father. Yeah. And there was that interesting kind of parallel between how he relates to his father, who he was doing that act of violence for. Yeah. And then that kid dealing with his father and what kind of humiliation there would be. I mean, there's some deep shit there going on for Hughes that I don't really know, like how that tracks. But like, there's some real sense of like the violence and the humiliation as a kid as a result of that in the face of your parents. Yeah, how your parents look at you, know?
And so this is what's so unique about it. It's like, this is completely unrealistic. The confession scene, which is kind of the jewel of this entire film, like in my mind, like it's this moment, and it's only in the last 20 minutes where the confessions start happening. It's like obviously assisted with marijuana, except for Allison, who didn't smoke, and and it really is Andrew's confession that sparks the whole thing. There's two things that are funny. So the second truth. So I also thought about like, so if we think about Brian first before we kind of delve deeper. Yeah. Brian's deal. What's his deal is like, he's the classic over compressed, nerd, right? He's like so wound up by his family, apparently, that his grades are all that matters. And, they're classic, like the K car says it, they're a working class family, and this is his chance. Like Brian is the character that would go to college and he becomes a tech billionaire and might turn into a complete asshole if it wasn't for the Breakfast Club. But if you watch the Reacher, have you watched the Reacher series on Amazon?
No.
Anthony Michael Hall plays a super wealthy gun runner. You have to watch it. It's awesome. So this is who he becomes. He becomes a super wealthy gun runner. He takes all his smarts and he turns it into weaponizing humanity.
Yeah, because he couldn't get the elephant lamp to work.
No,
if he would have only figured out the elephant lamp, that it would have been a totally different story, which is a great moment for him. And then the idea at first, he has everyone's respect because, they found a gun in my locker. Yeah. And everyone was like, whoa.
But
what?
wait, let's not jump to the confession yet. Come on. Let's build up to
plan?
This.
Jesus.
Well, a little bit of one because, Brian is the first one who's honest. And everybody's honest by being cornered into be honest at first. And Brian is the one through Claire and Bender is forced to admit he's a virgin, right? And, he's like, Bender is like bullying him about his sex life. And he's like, I've dated half of like the Canadian border, Niagara Falls.
Niagara Falls area.
And then he tries to trick him into saying he did it with Claire. And then he's forced to say he's a virgin. And basically the same thing happens to Claire in the start of the confession. But the way it happens is so brilliant because it's Allison who commits to this ruse of, it's the confession starts with basically, Claire trying to get Andrew to say like, what would you do for $1 million? One of these stupid games. And Allison is like, this is fucking stupid. And she cuts it off and starts saying like, I'd do anything sexual. And like, she just basically says she's a nymphomaniac and she's slept with her psychiatrist. And this is just amazing. Right?
Several times.
Yeah. And they're all just disgusted, but it turns into this manipulation of getting Claire to admit like she's a virgin. And so that's the kickoff to the confessional ultimately is these.
And the brilliant part of that is she's like, well, no, I'm not an nymphomaniac. I'm actually a compulsive liar, right. Which is so amazing. I love that.
Yeah. And so the confession, I think that's part of the confession scene that also just struck me so much is how much ultimately, I didn't remember this family being so much about their parents, right? And the idea of, because Andrew's confession is so striking. Like Claire's talked about her dysfunctional parents, using her and as they wind their way towards divorce. But Andrew's, confession about Larry Lester and taping his buns and the violence committed him on it. And then his embarrassment and just like him just starting to quote his dad, and he's doing this. It's like, Andrew, you've got to be number one. I won't tolerate losers in this family. Your intensity is for shit. Win. And then he literally says, I fucking hate him, Yeah. And John Bender, his only moment of clarity, I think, in the entire film is when he basically says, it's like my dad and your dad should go join a bowling league together. You know?
That's right. Yeah. Because Bender doesn't really have a confession, does he?
No, he doesn't. Never. No. And that's what I'm saying. And Claire doesn't really either, and that's why they stand apart, interestingly, in watching this, for the podcast is like, Bender, they just kind of his unrelenting attacks on this rich girl, and then her just unrepentant like snobbishness ultimately is the two things that just stand them apart. That they're on opposite ends, and that it is this myth that they find. I guess the closet at the end is their détente, but did they make out? Like it's like John Hughes described it, it's like that's their moment of like being accepting of one another. But it's like, I don't know, John Hughes, this is fucking high school. When people kiss, they're wondering what's going to happen next,
Exactly. It's not accepting. Yeah. Exactly.
And so, Brian has a similar confession in his, and I never noticed it until like I was looking, his locker is revealed in the opening scene. In the opening montage, we see a line of lockers, and there's one locker with this scar in the middle line of lockers, and there's because it's burned out, because that's the one that had the flare gun go off.
Yeah, because that was the gun he was talking about, where everyone was freaking out, which I loved.
He admits to contemplating suicide. Like, he literally had suicidal thoughts. So it's a very real, and again, I think that this is the opening up of the teenager's mind, because God knows this would never be talked out loud by a teenager. I think.
According to your theory, though, Allison was always then never really problematic, but always pretty honest. Just didn't have any friends.
Yeah, like Allison is the character that, I relate to the most, just because I saw these people that just didn't know how to navigate. I mean, I think what it doesn't do is, like, Allison definitely would have had friends. I think, honestly, I think there are other people that are misfits and they find one another. That's supposedly one of the things about archetypes, is they exist in this context. And I think they're not as, in the high school I went to, they weren't butting heads so dramatically, but they weren't interested in one another either at the same time. And, with leveling of classes based on your academic ability, there was some cutting across. Like, this idea that jocks are stupid was always such bullshit, right?
Yeah.
And pretty girls had no interest other than shopping. That was always, I thought, bullshit too, because those archetypes existed in an honors class, as well as like a class that was, level 3, as my like fucking high school called it, But Allison, yeah, she would have probably had misfit friends just like her that were interested in, the English pop releases and figuring out how to stand aside from the dominant culture,
So one of the things, though, I thought about with this one is, Brian and you're making the argument for Andrew, but I'll just say at this point, Brian and Allison come across, at least as Hughes writes them, as somewhat pure. I love that Allison has the insight that there's a certain amount of inevitability to us being like our parents.
Right.
And she's like really, deep in that. But then there's also this sense that Brian and Allison would never do what Claire, Bender, and maybe even Andrew would do, which means go back to school Monday and ignore them and pretend like they didn't know them. Like, they were already, because of their positionality and their lack of power, in some ways pure and good characters. Right. And I think there's this kind of mythos going on, I think, in John Hughes' mind, about like, this is about that, what we saw in Some Kind of Wonderful, this return of the great individuals, the ability to push back against conformity and societal norms, and that sense of rising. And I think it's a great idea. It's a great Hollywood kind of vision, but I don't know about in your high school experience, but my high school experience, that's not really how it went, right? No. Like, there wasn't really, like, the machine is the machine. And society controls and conforms, and I appreciate Hughes trying to push back against it and kind of suggesting an alternative, because that's what you want. I don't think it's childish as a suggestion, but I also think that's where this movie kind of runs into a certain amount of, like, the question is on Monday, what really happens?
Well, that's the whole point. It's like, we don't know. I mean, I think it kind of betrays, I guess, John Hughes' generational positioning a little bit, in that, Allison's the artist, Brian's the brain, the smart kid, and those are pure. People that are smart and artistic are who we should celebrate, and pure, and they're just as fucked up as everybody else ultimately, right? Yeah. And they have their desires to be in control and have power, as almost everybody does. And I mean, I think ultimately, and I think Molly Ringwald quoted this, and I'm from one of the many interviews, it's like, what's honest about it is everybody doesn't see themselves fitting in, and that's what makes this sustain.
Yeah.
right?
That.
Each character doesn't fit into this bigger world in somewhere because being a teenager is emotionally so raw. You feel so much and you want to express so much. And, I think in watching even the 2025, I think like Judd Nelson and Anthony Michael Hall still hadn't grown up. They just couldn't help but like jockey to talk, and just be the jokers of this. And interestingly, Emilio Estevez and Ali Sheedy basically didn't talk because they're the most like they just sat back. They were still the least likely to speak, just like the film. And I was like, well, those are the two I think probably figured it out, despite the kind of false makeover that was forced upon Ali Sheedy. The idea of it was interesting, but the extent of it was kind of, I think, false, and sadly. But I do. You go ahead. It's your turn.
There is a moment of truth in this film, and I'm going to return to it because the
Vernon?
moment of truth for me is the
Vernon.
moment in the closet in
Yeah.
Vernon. Now, not
It's
only
not with
the
Molly
moment in the
Ringwald.
closet-
It's with Vernon.
No, exactly. When Vernon really shows Blender how the world works, right? But then the other moment of truth is when Vernon and Carl. Vernon gets caught going through the secret
God,
files.
I love that. Yep.
And Carl says to Vernon, you care too much, essentially, what these kids think about you, right? And then Vernon goes on about these kids. They're getting worse. I've been doing this for 21 years, blah, blah, blah. And I think, Carl basically said, it's not them, it's you.
Right.
And there was a real moment. There was that John Hughes, like, you fucking boomers moment, like you've been talking about. Like, I think that's the subtitle of this one. You fucking boomers. But really, Vernon gets called out. But I think Vernon, that scene between Vernon and Bender, for me, is the most memorable. And for me, is kind of like one of those moments where all of the artifice of high school, which they're trying to get rid of over the course of this onion peeling and showing who they really are, that one is true to me because it's violent and it's in your face and it just hits you. Like, there's no more joking. And I love that because Hughes can do the other stuff as well as he can do that,
Yeah. I mean, I think back to well, it's too funny. It's two closets basically, right? One's in the basement where the secret files are, and they're literally drinking beer together, which is hilarious. Like, so this means like Carr, the janitor, has he's got his mini fridge with at least a 12-pack hanging out in it somewhere, and and it's got a bunch of old styles, and so there's that side of it, and it's adults being adults, and his disappointment is about the navel gazing that we're talking about. It's like his disappointment is disappointment in himself ultimately. Yeah. And that's the way I want you to maybe see Vernon in the closet with Bender too. His violence, he's disappointed in himself because he literally wants to beat this young adult up because he thinks he's justified. And I don't think that justification walks past the closet. He thinks because of Judd Nelson being a dickish kid, there's going to always be dickish kids. And does he deserve to take a bat to every single one of them? And he's failing to look at himself and how disaffected and violent he's become because he doesn't like his stature. He only makes $38,000 a year.
That's not bad in 1985. $31,000.
But he's on a public salary. He's going to have a great retirement, but he's never going to. He's going to live in a house that he bought in 1977 with an 18% mortgage that he paid off, in the early 2000s, and he's never going to have any fucking extra money to upgrade that thing, and it's going to look the same. And he's not married, and he's just fucking miserable. He becomes that dead man. What is it? The Michael Douglas character who's just a walking doll. Is like, I'm gonna suddenly because falling down. Another boomer asshole that is justified in being violent.
Yeah, that's a great one you did in Stepfather that you're returning to. I like that. But I want to just be clear here, Michael. I'm not necessarily saying Vernon's a good guy.
Okay.
I'm not necessarily saying Vernon is a pillar of the community, although he argues that. Yes. I'm saying there's that moment of truth when that guy's own frustration and this punk kid's comes. And then there's that artifice of being a kid and there being some kind of protections and this world providing them all falls apart. And what seems almost like a comedy and Bender's funny, it all falls away. And I think that's so powerful as a scene where you start to see his face change. And Vernon takes on almost this demonic character. And and his monologue's amazing. And I just think that's a telling, powerful scene. Not only because in some ways it's a funny scene and it's quotable and all that, but also because what it represents about this world. You know what I mean? And how quickly, that dynamic of power can shift in the dark, if you will, in the closet with this guy who may be frustrated and falling down.
He literally locks him in a closet, No, I mean, this is the extreme end of Vernon, right? And I think, they do put him in his place, with the letter, which has its subtle adjustments in the reading in their own voices at the end. And, I just keep going back to it. Just surprised me how much the parents were a part of this narrative. And that was ultimately, I think, what Hughes is trying to do. Though Vernon is the voice of adulthood, literally personified, with Carl being his, trying to make him a little bit of a better self, but it's not punching through. The voices of adulthood are what John Hughes is talking to about ultimately, even though it's through the lens of teenagers who are dealing with these adults and how they dominate their worlds and don't feel heard. And John Hughes is trying to be their voices. And, and so we forgot to even mention the revealing of Allison's character and why she's there. She had nothing better to do. And that's why, in the beginning, Vernon's like, hey, Missy, because he doesn't even know who she is because she's not supposed to be there,
Missy. Oh, my God.
And so we have this, revelation of, wow, your family life is that bad. You want to come to high school for 9 hours of detention. And we haven't even mentioned the construct of detention itself, the idea of incarceration, right? For proto-adults.
In this brutalist building, right?
In this brutalist building. Where you're supposed to not talk, not move, and definitely not sleep,
Nope. And write an essay about yourself, right? That's the whole thing. He comes 1,000 and not the same word over and over again 1,000 times, right?
When I say essay, I mean essay.
Okay, so look, we have done the Cameron Crowe, John Hughes, SmackDown over the last 4 or 5 episodes.
This is number 6.
This is the 6th episode. Wow. And so I just wonder, have we learned anything? I mean, maybe that Amy Heckerling is the real hero out of all these films. That's arguable. But, what do you take away from all this after looking at the two? Because it's been a nice deep dive. I love the connections you're able to draw. I love the ways in which you can see the construct of the teen movie in the 80s really emerging. And then kind of some ways finishing up, if you will, with Boyd Dobler. What's your takeaway, Michael?
So, I think that what Cameron Crowe, what I was starting to think about, with the exception of Say Anything, because I think Say Anything is it kind of stands almost more like a John Hughes movie in a lot of ways. Yeah. And it's because, the Wildlife and Fast Times at Ridgemont High are Cameron Crowe literally for a year observing teenagers, undercover and presenting what he saw. It's this is their natural habitat. This is how they behave. And there is all that realism, which I adore, especially their work lives, and these portraits of how they actually really engage one another and how it's kind of perfunctory and kind of just funny how misguided their thinking is, about how adulthood works and stuff like that. And so it's this really wonderful, just fly on the wall presentation of teenagers in their world by themselves, minus adults, because that's what that era was like. There was so little adult influence, and we get to see all these stupid things that they do. And that's what's so great about it. John Hughes has a different interest. His interest is in how do teenagers think, right? I've already basically said this. Like, he's trying to present to the audience, this is what teenagers are thinking. But he has to do it through explication. And so it doesn't ultimately seem realistic as, The Breakfast Club ultimately is a play, where they're narrating their inner lives. And obviously that's not realistic. We know this, but it doesn't matter because he wants the audience to say, it's like, this is how teenagers, from my perspective, what I've learned from them and spent hours and hours and hours talking to them and listening to them. Cameron Crowe, he was like kind of pulling things out of people. Like, he was like extracting material. John Hughes was a collaborator. I mean, in this most recent, gathering for the 40th anniversary, Judd Nelson said, I never had another director ever again collaborate with me the way that John Hughes was. He wanted to know what I think. He said, if the dialogue doesn't seem right, adjust it. And so he was incredibly interested in their thinking and teenagers. And so the whole point of the film in my mind is just like, this is how teenagers think about adults. This is how they think about their relationships with one another. But because of the framing of this podcast, I'm just so focused on how they think about adults. And that's what John Hughes did so well.
Yeah. And I really appreciate that reading, particularly, laced with the anti-boomer sentiment that you've been pretty good about doing in this episode, which I think really works. And I think, John Hughes in some ways is the poet of the teen of the 80s, whereas I think Cameron Crowe is the kind of offbeat documentarian of that moment. I like that. I think it works. And I think it was a really nice kind of deep dive for me. And especially I got to bring one of my kids along who really enjoyed these to say, like, here's like what might be considered iconic films of what an 80s teenager was. And I'm just interested in what a teenager in 2025 takes from that. What they take, what they leave behind, how they understand that. Does that at all inform their way of being? And in some ways, I really think The Breakfast Club, surprisingly, because for me, I think Fast Times at Ridgemont High hit so much harder for me this time than Breakfast Club. Whereas for my son, it was the opposite. Yeah. And so, like, I'm
which
kind of
makes
wondering
sense.
Why, right? Yeah.
Yeah, and I think it's because teenagers want to hear how they might think if they understood themselves better, right? Like that's the idea. It's like this ability to all this noise in your head as a teenager and your surroundings. If someone could actually like put it out there and make sense of it for me, that would be great. Whereas Fast Times is literally, as the title says, it's chaos. It's like so much coming at these poor kids, like a million miles per hour, and all this decision making with so little guidance. Yeah. And I think it's cool because Ali Sheedy she talked talked about how she also did what you did. She watched 16 Candles with her kids and described how it literally changed her parenting, like navigating this movie with her kids and realizing like, oh my God, this is nuts. And remembering, this relationship that, I think in some parts, John Hughes, there's a whole podcast about it from This American Life, apparently. So, I mean, I haven't listened to it.
I haven't seen that. Yeah, I haven't heard that either.
So cool. It's one of the things I didn't quite get to that I wish to. So I really enjoyed this approach we took the Family Pictures podcast down, like doing a deep dive. And I think we might approach it again. We'll kind of hold back what that's going to be. Because Jim's going on vacation for a little while after this. People won't hear this, but we have actually just finished recording Fast Times a day early, but we're going to still keep them a week apart.
That's right. Because you know what? We're here to deliver. Right? The postman. We're like the postman. We always deliver.
In a post-apocalyptic podcasting world.
All right, everybody. Thanks again. And Michael, you're the best.
You too, Jim. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.